What if the person you loved, the one you trusted with your life, carried a secret so dark it could shake the foundation of everything you believed in? This isn't just another story. This is the haunting case of Emily Walker, a woman whose charm masked a chilling secret, and her husband, Matthew Walker, a man loved and respected in their small community. It's a story of love turned sour, trust turned to betrayal, and a crime that left an entire neighborhood in shock. And it all happened in a place that should have been a sanctuary, a backyard, just like the one you might have behind your own home. Before we go on, subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell to ensure you never miss another captivating crime documentary. Your support helps keep the memories of those we've lost alive. In the summer of 2018, a small, quiet neighborhood in Illinois became the center of a story that would shock the nation. Beneath the surface, something unspeakable took place. Matthew, a man whose generosity and warmth touched everyone he met, disappeared without a trace. Emily, his wife, known for her laugh that could light up any room, had everyone fooled, and as the neighborhood carried on, no one could have imagined the horror that lay hidden right beneath their feet. But what could push someone like Emily to cross such a line? What could make her not just take her husband's life, but then go on to marry someone else, right on the grave of the man she buried with her own hands? Stop for a moment and think. How well do you know the people closest to you? Would you notice the signs if someone you loved was hiding a deadly secret? And, more importantly, would they trust you enough to let that secret slip? This story isn't just about what happened, it's about the questions it forces us to ask ourselves. What would you do if you were faced with such betrayal? Could you spot the warning signs before it was too late? At first glance, Emily Walker was the kind of woman who could make anyone feel at ease. Her infectious laugh filled every room she entered. Her kindness seemed boundless, and her love for Matthew appeared genuine. Matthew, on the other hand, was the kind of man you'd want to call a friend, hard-working, generous, and devoted. Together they seemed to have it all. A charming home, a close-knit group of friends, and a bond that many envied. But appearances, as we all know, can be deceiving. Behind the walls of their home, cracks had begun to form in their relationship. Friends of the couple, like Julia and Marcus, recalled hearing whispers of arguments. Nothing too serious, they thought. Just the kind of disagreements any couple might have. But these were no ordinary disagreements. What no one knew at the time was that their marriage was unraveling. Matthew had suspicions, things he couldn't quite put his finger on. Emily, on the other hand, had plans that no one could have imagined. To the outside world, they were the perfect couple. But inside those walls, something sinister was brewing. And then, one day, Matthew vanished. At first, it didn't raise too many alarms. Emily explained it away so effortlessly, saying he had taken a trip to clear his mind, to escape the stress of daily life. It sounded reasonable enough. After all, people sometimes need space. But weeks turned into months, and Matthew never returned. Neighbors like Mrs. Lillian Carter began to notice strange things. Emily never seemed distraught. There were no signs of mourning or worry. Instead, she appeared calm. Too calm. And then there were the late-night activities. Lights on in the backyard well past midnight, the faint sound of digging, and a growing unease that no one could quite shake. The day Emily announced her engagement to another man, a local contractor named Mark James, was the day the whispers truly began. How could she move on so quickly? What kind of person marries so soon after their husband's disappearance? But it wasn't just the timing that unsettled people. It was the location of the ceremony. Right there, in the backyard. The very place where Matthew had last been seen. It's easy to look back now and wonder how no one pieced it together sooner. But at the time, Emily played the role of a grieving wife so convincingly that no one dared to question her, and those who did, like Julia, were quickly silenced by Emily's charm, her composure, and her ability to deflect any suspicion. But here's the chilling question. What could drive someone to such extremes? What could push Emily Walker to bury her husband in secret, stand over his grave, and pledge her love to someone else? This isn't just a story about murder, it's a story about the masks we wear, the lies we tell, and the darkness that can lurk just beneath the surface. What do you think? If you were her neighbor, would you have noticed something was off? Would you have asked the questions that no one else dared to ask? Or would you, like so many others, have been fooled by the appearance? As you listen to this story, keep these questions in mind, because sometimes the most shocking part isn't what someone does, it's how they manage to hide it in plain sight. As the weeks passed, the picture-perfect facade of Emily and Matthew's marriage began to show its cracks. At first, it was subtle, little things that close friends might dismiss as the pressures of daily life. There were whispered arguments behind closed doors, moments when Matthew's voice would rise in frustration, or Emily's would cut through the air like ice. Money was tight. Matthew had recently invested heavily in a new business venture, and while he was optimistic the returns were slow, Emily, on the other hand, was growing restless. Friends recalled that she had begun to complain about their financial struggles, hinting at her dissatisfaction in ways that felt ominous. Then there was the jealousy. It wasn't clear who started it, but people began to notice how possessive Emily had become. A casual glance from another woman or an innocent conversation was enough to spark tension. Matthew, too, started to question her loyalty. There were rumors of late-night phone calls, whispers of someone else in the picture, though no one could confirm anything. Neighbors began to sense something was wrong. At night, strange sounds would echo from their backyard, quiet at first, then unmistakable. The rhythmic scrape of a shovel against dirt, the occasional dull thud of something heavy being dropped. One neighbor, a retired school teacher, later admitted she had seen Emily pacing the backyard one evening, holding what looked like a lantern. The faint glow illuminated her face, and for a fleeting moment, the neighbors said, she looked unrecognizable. Still, no one thought much of it at the time. People heard things, saw things, but life went on. After all, who wants to assume the worst about someone they've shared dinner with or waved to in passing? But here's a question for you. If you heard strange noises coming from your neighbor's yard in the dead of night, what would you do? Would you muster the courage to investigate? Or would you tell yourself, it's none of your business, and go back to sleep? These neighbors chose the latter. Whether it was fear, apathy, or simply not wanting to interfere, they turned a blind eye. And it was this silence, this unwillingness to ask questions, that allowed Emily's plan to unfold without interruption. By the time anyone noticed Matthew's absence, Emily had already begun weaving her story. She told friends he'd left for a business trip, needing time to clear his head. Her delivery was flawless, calm, collected, and convincing. When someone asked why he hadn't called, she would smile faintly and explain that he wanted space, that he'd always been the type to retreat when life got overwhelming. But there were details that didn't add up. Why had he left behind his phone, his wallet? Why hadn't anyone seen him leave? These questions lingered in the air, unanswered, but no one dared to confront Emily directly. It wasn't until months later, when the truth began to surface, that those who had heard the noises at night started to piece it all together. The sounds of digging, the strange glow in the backyard, Emily pacing under the cover of darkness. They weren't just random events, they were part of a carefully orchestrated plan, one that no one had dared to imagine. And here's where the story takes its darkest turn. It was a night like any other. The air was heavy, the neighborhood quiet. Matthew had come home late from work, tired but looking forward to a quiet evening. Emily had been waiting for him, her demeanor unusually composed. There was no argument that night, no raised voices. In fact, by all accounts, it was calm. Too calm. What happened next is a matter of chilling speculation pieced together by investigators. It's believed Emily had been planning this for weeks, maybe even months. The poison, traces of which were later found, was slipped into Matthew's drink. It was subtle, undetectable to him. He likely felt drowsy, disoriented, before he collapsed. That's when Emily acted. Methodical, precise, and without hesitation. She dragged his body to the backyard where the hole had already been prepared, a grave hidden in plain sight. The hours ticked by as she worked tirelessly, covering her tracks with an eerie calmness. By dawn, the backyard looked untouched. as though nothing had happened. The hole was filled, the ground smoothed over, and Emily returned to the house to clean every trace of what she had done. It was as if she had rehearsed it in her mind 100 times. What's most chilling, though, is how Emily carried on afterward. Not just as if nothing had happened, but as if she were liberated. She began hosting dinner parties again, inviting friends and neighbors to laugh and drink mere feet away from where Matthew's body lay. Guests later recalled her energy during those evenings, how she seemed lighter, freer. If anyone found her behavior odd, they kept it to themselves. After all, grief affects people differently. Or so they thought. The community was still reeling from Matthew's disappearance when Emily made her next move. It had been only a matter of weeks since Matthew had vanished, but she was already making plans to remarry. And not just anywhere. She chose to hold the ceremony in her backyard. Imagine the guests arriving, the laughter, the toasts, the vows, all while her first husband lay beneath their feet, hidden but not forgotten. But what truly left the community speechless wasn't just the wedding itself. It was the man Emily married. He wasn't a stranger. He wasn't someone new. He was someone Matthew had known. The whispers began again, louder this time. People started to connect the dots, to revisit the strange noises, the hurried explanations, the moments they had brushed off as insignificant. But by then, it was too late. The crime had been committed, Matthew was buried, and Emily remarried. The police were called, of course, but the story doesn't end there. In fact, this is only the beginning of what would become one of the most shocking cases the town had ever seen. So here's the question for you. If you were one of those neighbors, would you have put the pieces together sooner? Could you have stopped Emily before it was too late? Or would you, like so many others, have been fooled by her charm, her composure, her ability to make you doubt your own instincts? Because what happened next is even more unbelievable than what you've heard so far, and it's proof that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones hiding in plain sight. It was a wedding unlike any other, though not for the reasons most might imagine. Invitations had gone out just weeks after Matthew's disappearance, causing whispers throughout the small community. People were confused, even uncomfortable, but no one wanted to be the one to question her decision outright. She's moving on quickly, some said, shaking their heads. Others wondered how she could plan a celebration while her husband's whereabouts were still unknown. On the day of the wedding, the backyard was transformed. Twinkling lights strung between trees, soft music playing in the background, and rows of chairs arranged perfectly on the freshly tended lawn. If you didn't know the truth, it might have seemed picturesque, beautiful even, but for those who had been following the oddities surrounding Emily's story, it felt off. As the ceremony began, guests couldn't help but notice her radiant smile. She looked happy, almost too happy. Her new partner, the groom, was someone familiar to many in attendance, a man who had been a casual presence in her life before Matthew's disappearance. He was a colleague, someone Matthew had trusted, someone who had once shared a drink at the very table now set for the reception. His name was Mark. And now? He was her new husband. But the most unsettling detail wasn't the groom or the speed of her remarriage, it was the location. The ceremony took place directly above the spot where Matthew lay buried. Unbeknownst to the guests, they stood on a grave, toasting to new beginnings, laughing and celebrating a union built on a horrifying secret. A few attendees later admitted to feeling uneasy during the event. One guest recalled standing near the edge of the yard and noticing the peculiar way the soil seemed disturbed. Another mentioned how the bride grew tense when a curious child wandered too close to a particular patch of ground, but no one said anything. No one dared to ruin the day or accuse her of something unthinkable. The wedding proceeded without interruption. The vows were exchanged, the rings slipped onto fingers, and the first dance was shared under the soft glow of lanterns. To an outsider, it might have looked like the perfect celebration, but to those who knew the whispers, the unanswered questions, and the lingering unease, it was a grotesque spectacle. As the evening wore on, the questions began to bubble to the surface. Guests started whispering amongst themselves. piecing together fragments of conversations they'd had with the bride in the weeks prior. Why was she so quick to remarry? Why hadn't there been a proper investigation into Matthew's disappearance? And why did she insist on holding the ceremony in the backyard of all places? One guest, emboldened by a few too many glasses of wine, finally asked the question outright. "Isn't it strange, celebrating here when your husband is still missing?" Her reaction was telling. She froze for a moment, her smile faltering before she quickly recovered, brushing off the comment with a laugh. "Life has to go on," she said, her tone light but her eyes cold. The unease grew. People began excusing themselves early, their polite smiles masking their discomfort, and though they didn't know it at the time, their suspicions would soon be confirmed in the most horrifying way imaginable. So here's a question for you. If you attended a wedding and later discovered it was held on someone's grave, how would you feel? Would you confront the bride, demand answers, or would you walk away, unable to process the enormity of what had happened? It didn't take long after the wedding for the whispers to reach the authorities. A concerned guest, perhaps racked with guilt, perhaps simply unable to shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, came forward with their suspicions. They told investigators about the strange noises they'd heard at night, the hurried explanations from the bride, and the peculiar behavior leading up to the ceremony. The police began to dig deeper, both figuratively and literally. They started with the phone records, noting a flurry of late-night calls between Emily and her new partner, Mark, in the weeks before Matthew's disappearance. They interviewed neighbors who reluctantly admitted to hearing the sounds of digging and seeing the glow of a lantern in the dead of night. But it was the backyard itself that held the darkest evidence. Armed with a warrant, investigators arrived at the home, their shovels hitting the soil that had been so meticulously smoothed over. It didn't take long for them to uncover the truth. Beneath the carefully tended grass, they found Matthew's body, his remains wrapped in a tarp and buried just feet from where the wedding had taken place. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community. News spread quickly, and suddenly everything began to make sense. The rushed wedding, the odd behavior, the unsettling noises, it all pointed to a premeditated plan that had been hiding in plain sight. When confronted with the evidence, Emily initially denied everything. She feigned shock, even horror at the idea that her husband's body had been found on her property. But the cracks in her story were too large to ignore. Under pressure, she began to unravel, her once calm demeanor giving way to anger and desperation. Mark, too, was brought in for questioning. He claimed ignorance at first, insisting he had no knowledge of what had happened. But as investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a series of messages between the two, cryptic but damning. Finally, faced with mounting evidence, Emily confessed. Her words were chilling in their simplicity. He was in the way. She admitted to poisoning her husband, burying him in the backyard, and planning the wedding as a way to erase the past and start anew. The community was left reeling. How could someone so seemingly normal commit such an unthinkable act? How could she smile, laugh, and celebrate while standing on the grave of the man she had killed? And yet, the story doesn't end there, because as horrifying as the crime itself was, it's the questions it leaves behind that haunt us the most. How well do we really know the people we trust? And how many secrets are hiding just beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered? The story of the backyard wedding turned graveyard crime isn't just one of murder and deceit, it's a reflection of the darker corners of human nature. Trust is often the foundation of our closest relationships, but what happens when that trust is weaponized? Betrayed? The community that once celebrated alongside her now looks back with a mix of horror and disbelief. How did no one notice the signs sooner? How did a wife, a person meant to be her husband's closest ally, become his executioner? These are questions that linger, unanswered like a shadow over those who knew the couple. What drives someone to cross the line from love to murder? Was it greed? A desire for freedom? Or something far deeper, far darker? Emily's confession, chilling as it was, offered little insight into her motives. He was in the way. Just 5 words, yet they carried the weight of an unthinkable act. Justice, of course, was eventually served. Emily and her accomplice Mark now faced the full force of the law, their plans unraveled by the very community they once deceived. But justice doesn't always heal the scars left behind. The neighbors, the guests who unknowingly celebrated over a grave, and even the officers who unearthed the truth. They're all left grappling with the aftershocks of this harrowing crime. This story raises unsettling questions. Do we ever truly know the people closest to us? Is it possible for someone to live a double life, harboring sinister intentions behind a facade of normalcy? And perhaps, most chillingly, what would you do if someone you loved turned out to be capable of such an act? As you reflect on this story, consider the lengths people will go to for their desires, whether it's love, money, or power. What drives someone to the point where betrayal becomes not only an option, but a calculated choice? In the end, the scars of this crime stretch far beyond the grave and the backyard. They've left an indelible mark on the community, a reminder that even the most picturesque lives can hide unspeakable horrors. So, I'll leave you with this. Can betrayal ever truly be forgiven? Can trust ever be rebuilt after such devastation? And most importantly, how far would you go to uncover the truth if the people closest to you began to raise suspicion? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Could you have seen the signs? Could you forgive such a betrayal? Or would you forever carry the weight of this story, much like the community it left behind? In the end, justice was served, but it remains a chilling reminder that sometimes the darkest secrets are buried right beneath our feet. Don't forget to hit the like button, share, and subscribe to our channel. Together we can keep the memories of those we've lost alive.